Welcome to the Globalcurrent. I'm Joe Doe.
And I'm Howard Hurst.
With your morning news. Iran fails to meet UN deadline. Iran continues to push forward with its nuclear program in spite of a UN Security Council order to freeze nuclear activity. The Security Council decision called for Iran to halt all nuclear activity by this past Wednesday, February 21st. Instead of complying with the decision, Iran has announced its intentions to proceed with its development of nuclear power. The deputy head of Iran's nuclear program, Mohammad Saeedi, has said Iran considers that a suspension of uranium would be contrary to its rights to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to international rules. Many who are involved in the ongoing dispute, including U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, IAEA Chief Mohammed El-Barbadei, and UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon have displayed regret and disappointment at Iran's decision. A 6-page report released this week by El-Barbadei outlines Iran's failure to comply with UN resolutions. It also states that Iran has made no attempt to clear up or divulge information about the history of its nuclear program. Iran continues to claim that it intends to pursue nuclear power for peaceful energy purposes only.
Quartet calls for the recognition of Israel. Delegates from the U.S., Russia, the UN, and the European Union met in Berlin this week to discuss prospects for peace talks between Palestinian and Israeli officials. The 4 delegates have been nicknamed the Quartet. The group reaffirmed their stance that they would support the creation of a Palestinian state that recognizes Israel as a sovereign entity and renounces violence. The U.S. and the other 3 delegates disagree on how to deal with Hamas. Condoleezza Rice reaffirmed the U.S. stance that it will continue with economic sanctions until its requirements are met. The European delegates showed more flexibility and said that they are willing to find members within Hamas that they can work with instead of turning to economic sanctions.
Philippine Army linked to murders. The Philippine Army has been linked to murders of protesters by a government-backed committee investigation this week. The report's results were released just a day after Philip Elston said the Army is in almost complete denial about its role in the killings. Mr. Elston is the UN Special Reporter on extrajudicial executions. Philippine Armed Forces General Esperon rebutted, stating at a news conference that Mr. Elston might be in a state of denial himself. A local human rights group called Kerapatan has claimed that around 850 people have been killed or are missing since the Philippines President Gloria Arroyo entered office in 2001.
Train tragedy during India-Pakistan peace talks. At least 68 people have been confirmed dead after the bombing of a train named the Friendship Express, which travels between India and Pakistan. The explosion was caused by 2 crudely made explosives placed strategically on board the train. There were 2 more bombs on board, but they did not detonate. The train line was commissioned as a symbol of hope between the 2 nations. Meanwhile, India and Pakistan continued the difficult process of negotiating peace. Both nations endeavored to not point blame and focus instead on the future of the 2 nations. Officials view the attack as an attempt to stop the peace process, most likely committed by Islamist terrorists from Pakistan to drive India from Kashmir. Italian ex-Prime Minister regains support. Italian Prime Minister Romano Prodi resigned on Thursday after losing a key Senate vote on his foreign policy proposal. Many leftist politicians are now supporting Prodi's decision to repeal his resignation. Prodi made it clear that he would not want the position again unless the far-left members of his unstable 9-party coalition backed his agenda completely. Disagreement broke out in the Italian Senate when 2 communist senators refused to attack the Italian government's policy in Afghanistan and the expansion of an American base in Vicenza in northern Italy. Former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi argues that almost any rearranged Prodi government would probably be even weaker than the one that just failed.
Jail time for Egyptian blogger. In other news, Egyptian courts have just sentenced an internet blogger to 4 years in prison for insulting Islam and the Egyptian president. The blogger, Adbel Karim Nabil Suleiman, received 3 years for slandering Islam and 1 year for attacking the president. Suleiman is an aspiring human rights lawyer at Al-Azhar University and an active online political commentator. Suleiman's lawyers plead not guilty, arguing the freedom of expression in the Egyptian constitution. They plan to appeal the court's decisions. Britain increases its troops in Afghanistan. Britain will add 1,000 extra soldiers to the 5,000-soldier British commitment and 35,000 NATO commitment in Afghanistan. This increase in Afghanistan is just days after an announcement by Tony Blair that Britain will be withdrawing 1,600 troops from Iraq. The British Defense Minister spokesman said that the force levels in Afghanistan are constantly under review to ensure that commanders have sufficient troops. All troop commitments are through Parliament's adherence.
Gambian president announces mystic powers. President Yawa Jama of Gambia believes he possesses mystical powers. Jama, who has envisioned making Gambia rich through her oil reserves, has yet to find any oil. The president recently announced that it is possible for him to cure AIDS and asthma on certain days of the week for a limited number of people. Jama's vision gave him recipes of herbs mentioned in the Quran. He is currently designated to treat no more than 10 AIDS patients on Thursdays and Mondays, and no more than 100 asthma patients on Fridays and Saturdays. 3 politicians slain in Guatemala. Salvadorian President Tony Saca declared Thursday one of the saddest days in the history of El Salvador. Saca said that the deaths marked the saddest day in the history of his party, Arena, after the murders of 3 of its members. The FBI has been asked to help the investigation of the deaths of these 3 politicians. The 3 men, including their driver, were shot and then burned alive in a Toyota Land Cruiser. Their charred bodies were found on Thursday. In Guatemala City, 4 police officers were arrested and have been linked to the murders. 2 of the men are high-ranking officers, and the other 2 form part of the organized crime unit.
Costa Rica criticizes Hugo Chavez. President Oscar Arias criticized Chavez for assuming extraordinary powers earlier this month. Costa Rica on Wednesday also accused Chavez of closing down an aluminum plant in this Central American country for, quote, political reasons, in retaliation to the criticisms. Last week, Chavez announced the closure of the CVG Alunasa plant that employs 400 workers. It produced 10,000 tons annually, but Venezuela claimed that the plant was not economically viable. Costa Rica rejects this explanation, maintaining that Venezuela is trying to use this as punishment. According to Costa Rican officials, there is no need for the closing of the plant. The plant has operated in Costa Rica for the past 25 years.
New information on the whereabouts of Colombian hostage. In a press conference with French media, Colombian President Álvaro Uribe confirmed he had received information on the whereabouts of Franco-Colombian Ingrid Betancourt. She was running for the presidency in 2002 when she was taken hostage by the rebel group FARC on February 23rd of that year. In 2003, the French government sent a rescue team, but failed to liberate her. According to recent information, Betancourt is no longer in Colombia, but has been sent abroad. President Uribe stressed that this may be just rumors. He does not have any verifiable information.
There's a positive outlook on North Korea. In a speech in Sydney last week, U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney seemed optimistic about recent agreements with North Korea. He said the American government is entering this deal with open eyes, but that it, quote, represents a first hopeful step toward a better future for the North Korean people. After 3 years of talks, North Korea came to an agreement earlier this month. In return for $300 million in energy and financial aid, North Korea will stop its production of plutonium and start closing down its nuclear program. Former UN Representative John Bolton publicly opposed this deal, claiming it would encourage other countries to follow the example of North Korea and develop a nuclear program.
Check. Okay. Elections in Quebec make its future uncertain. Quebec's future will be at stake in the upcoming election for provincial government on March 26th. Premier Jean Charest calls for this election yesterday and fears that the choice will be between unity and separation. He said that if the Parti Québécois were to win, that would signify the passing of another referendum on secession for the Canadian province. Charest and the leader of the Parti Québécois recently exchanged harsh words. Bois Claire accused Charest of being a liar and not keeping promises made when the Liberal Party came into power. Charest defends himself, outlining the progress that has been made in Quebec, including the federal government's recognition of Quebec as a nation. Bois Claire, on the other hand, claims that Quebec's desire for sovereignty has not been addressed.